Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to Pirkei Avos. We have now completed the cycle of Pirkei Avos once between Pesach and Shavuos, and now we continue with our second time around. So now we're all experts. Once heard that there was a person who was hired by a company that sold soaps to try to pick up business. How do you advance business? He says the business has been down for the shampoo company, and how do you cause there to be? How do you gain more customers? The solution he came to was not about more customers. He said all you have to do is add one word to the bottle of shampoo. Till now it said rinse and lather. Just add the word rinse, lather, and repeat. So now instead of putting one dose of shampoo, you put a second dose, so each person gets through the bottle twice as fast, and business doubled. So we've done the first Pirkei Avos, we did rinse and lather. Now we got to repeat and do the Pirkei Avos again. It's not such a terrible analogy because ultimately Pirkei Avos is there to cleanse ourselves, cleanse our behavior. So just as you can't suffice with cleaning, taking a shower once a week, at least do twice a week, right? So therefore today we repeat now the Pirkei Avos chapter 1 again, and what we've been doing is trying to make our way through one Mishnah, which there's so much commentary on Pirkei Avos. It's worth repeating that although there is a custom that some have to just study for the first 6 weeks between Pesach and Shavuos, and they see Pirkei Avos as a preface to the giving of Torah, because Derech Eretz Kadma Torah. There is another approach, which is to study Pirkei Avos all summer long. The Ramah and the Shulchan Aruch brings that down. The idea is that some have the tradition to study it all summer long, and the idea behind that is that summer is a time where we often let our guard down. Different reasons for that. The weather is nicer, perhaps. There's a more joyous energy. People are more relaxed, which is all good. But sometimes alongside that, we let our guard down with regards to our morals and our ethics and our values. We're not as focused. We're not as disciplined as it is vacation time, as it is, I see this firsthand with my children during their summer break. I'll be perfectly honest. And that is that our home is less disciplined in the summertime because they don't have the schedule of waking up and going to school. So it's just a less disciplined time. And for that reason, the study of Pirkei Avos keeps us on track for the duration of the summer. So let's go back to chapter 1. Yeah, this is nice enough, right? Could be better. It'll get better. Chapter 1, I'd like to do what is, and again, not always do all versions have the same Mishnahs in the same order. So I think this is chapter 1, Mishnah 14. Which is, Bob, what page is in the blue sitter? 273. And this is the third statement in the blue sitter, page 273. Chapter 1, Mishnah 14. This is the third in a series of statements by the great sage Hillel. So Hillel is one of the more renowned sages of Jewish history. We have institutions named for him. Locally, we have the Hillel Day School. There's a major international organization on campus called Hillel. And it's not by mistake that organizations which have to do with education have to do with Hillel. Hillel was a master educator. Hillel was also known for his love and compassion. There's many stories which illustrate that. There's some famous stories in Tractate Shabbos about how those who were interested in converting, and they first went to another great authority of the time named Shammai, and Shammai was a little bit severe with them, not in a bad way, but perhaps in a more honest way, because their approaches were, the approach they had towards this conversion was not very appropriate. Shammai told them off, and Hillel welcomed them in. The Talmud shares several stories, and the Talmud points out that Hillel's approach of welcoming even those who perhaps were undeserving of that welcome and patience paid off. And these people were brought tachas kanfei hashchina. They were brought under the wings of the Shekhinah, under the divine wings. Yes.
Converts ever track to see how they turned out after they were accepted by school?
Were those converts ever tracked? People who don't hear the question. Were they ever tracked to see how those stories turned out? I don't. To my knowledge, no. I mean, the Talmud. All the Talmud says is that those three met up together later on, some point later on, and they each praised Hillel. Maybe they didn't even know of each other's stories. They praised Hillel, saying that even though we came in with a somewhat misguided approach, Hillel guided us so that when we did embrace Judaism, it was with commitment and with complete commitment. That subject in that story of the Talmud is subject of its own class. It's its own fascinating episode. But the point is that Hillel, his way of approaching was with kindness and with understanding. So he was a teacher, but a teacher who also had a lot of patience and kindness. Okay. So in the Pirkei Avot in this chapter, we have three statements of Hillel, and I want to jump to the third of the three statements. And here is where he shares an idea which is somewhat cryptic, which, as does most of Pirkei Avot, allows for many interpretations, but is very profound. And here's what he says. Chapter 3, Halacha 14. Hu haya omer. He used to say. And by the way, the fact that this is divided or separated into its own Mishnah is telling. In other words, the Pirkei Avos could have shared all of his statements in one Mishnah. The fact that it divides it into three Mishnahs means that each one is meant to be, to some degree, evaluated on its own. That you're supposed to take each one of the Mishnahs, even though they're from the same source, but the first one is its own general idea being conveyed, and that should be understood as such. The second one, which has to do with Torah study, is on its own, should be understood kind of within its own framework. And the third is its own self-standing idea. They're connected, and you can perhaps see Hillel's personality throughout all of them. But there are three different, each one is its own essential idea. Here's what he says. Hu haya omer. He used to say, here's what he used to say. Im ein ani li mili. If I am not for myself, who will be for me? If I am not for myself, who will be for me? Ukisha ani la'atzmi. And if I am only for myself, ma'ani, what am I? V'im lo achshav, and if not now, emasai, when? So if I'm only for myself, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? Shani la'atzmi, when I am for myself, exclusively for myself, ma'ani, what am I? V'im lo achshav, emasai, if not now, then when? You're saying, why did I add the word exclusively? Kisha'ani le'atzmi basically means if I am for myself alone. I mean, that's the emphasis over there. Le'atzmi, just myself. So then, what am I? And if not now, then when? The easiest part of the statement to understand is the last one. If not now, when? I think that's pretty clear what that means, although we'll see different commentaries about that. But the first part, the first two statements are a little bit more difficult to understand. And what exactly is Hillel saying? So as we've done, I'd like to take this Mishnah and understand it from the various angles that are taught. So we start with the classic commentary. The classic commentary on all of Mishnah is Rabbi Ovadia Bartenura. So how does the Bartenura understand the statements? We'll read through it, the commentary. Imein anili, says the Bartenura, Im ein ani zoche la'atzmi, if I don't bring merit upon myself, mi yizke b'shvili, who's going to bring merit for me? I have to bring merit upon myself. I can't expect it to come from anyone else. I can't expect others to carry my weight. I can't live off anyone else's, I'm not talking about financially. I can't live off anybody else's goodness. It is upon me. You know, they say about a person who walks into a butcher shop and he says, is this place kosher? You know, once upon a time. Nowadays we have, it's all about the organizations that certify an institution. Once upon a time, that wasn't really the way it was. In the shtetl, you relied on the butcher. If you did rely on them, you bought the meat. If you didn't, you didn't. So a person walks into the butcher shop and says, is this a kosher institution or not? So the butcher says, look at the wall. And he shows a picture of a man with a long white beard. He says, that was my grandfather. He says, this is my grandfather. Of course you should trust this institution. To which the man said, if it was your picture on the wall and he was behind the counter, I'd trust the institution. But the other way around, I don't know. So basically, ideally, you can't rely on the fact that maybe your grandfather and your grandmother were super religious with a long white beard and lived in the shtetl. You know, that's not going to stand in your favor. Anili, he says, if you don't bring merit to yourself, who is going to bring merit to you? This is not, there is this idea of schus avos. There's no question that the merit of one's parents stand for one's children. That's the part we say in the davening every day. We start the Shemona Esrei with by bringing to memory Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and we go to the grave sites of Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah. We go to the grave sites of the patriarchs and matriarchs. We do believe that they bring merit, but that's certainly not a attitude in life to live by. As this is where my credibility is, or where my zuchus stands for. You were going to say something?
Yeah. So about a year ago, he said a quote, and it included the word
Yizka. A year ago, I said a quote which included the word. A quote from Torah. Oh. Which quote? I'm not. Yizka. I don't know. Okay, so I'm not sure. I'm not sure which quote that you're referring to. Okay, so that's the main anili. If I don't merit for myself, who will merit for me? Ukeshe anila atzmi, continues the Bartanura. And then he says, all right, so what if a person says, fine, I took this first statement seriously. Kshanila atzmi, and now I have worked really hard, and now I could pat myself on the back and take credit for all I've done. He says, Kshanila atzmi, and then when I do look inward and say, yes, I deserve accolades and applause for what I've done, says Bartanura, even if I have merited for myself. This is Hillel saying this. Mahu haskus hazeh. What exactly is this merit? And is it really that impressive? Keneged masha ani chayev lasas. When I consider what is obligated of me to do and what I am capable of doing. So he says, the first is you have to rely on your own merits. On the other hand, if you do feel that you've worked hard, nonetheless, you have to have the humility to say that I really live up to what my potential is. And this is something that if Hillel is saying this, and Hillel is someone who accomplished a tremendous amount. Few in history could say they accomplished what Hillel did. But even as you do accomplish, don't get caught up in your own merit. Recognize that whatever you've accomplished, if you're honest with yourself, you'll have the humility to recognize that this is insufficient compared to what God wants of me and what God expects of me. And there's a certain humility. The point over here is not to be depressed. The point over here is to be constantly motivated. So Rabbi would say a person should be proud of what they've done, but never satisfied with what they've done. You could be proud of your accomplishments. A person who's not proud of their accomplishments is a mistake. You should be proud of what you've accomplished and proud of the mitzvahs you've done and certainly the mitzvahs you've caused others to do. But at the same time, being satisfied is not a holy trait. Because you have to understand, Shanila Atzmi, when I think of what I've accomplished on my own, Ma'ani, what am I really in comparison to what God expects of me to do? That's what the Bartanura understands this second statement. And the third statement of the Imlo Achshav, a Masai, if not now, then when? Says the Bartanura, there are two ways of understanding this statement. What is Achshav? What is the definition of now? If not now, then when? What is now and what is when? What are those times referring to? Says the Bartanura first, Imla Achshav is Ba'olam Haza, in this world. If not now, then when? Recognize the supremacy of this world in its opportunities, because even though Judaism certainly believes in a world to come, but the opportunities that are in this world will not exist in the next world. The next world is called the Olam HaEmes, the world of truth. But this world, even though it's also referred to as the Olam HaSheker, but it's also the world of mitzvah opportunity. There's no mitzvah opportunity in the world to come, which is why when someone passes away, we add in mitzvahs for their merit, because they no longer can do mitzvahs. We become the hands and feet of that soul which no longer can do mitzvahs. As holy and as righteous as that soul was, imagine a deeply righteous person passes away, and now perhaps a very simple person says, in the merit of that person, I will now do an extra mitzvah. So now they are doing something that the holiest of holy can't do once they've passed on. Take advantage of every moment in this world, because afterwards the advantage of mitzvahs doesn't exist. We just completed I'll share something. Some of you maybe join me for this series. So we just completed a medical ethics series. And the final topic we spoke about was the topic of risky treatment, risky and what we call the risky and experimental treatment. And the questions, which are often very, very difficult situations, question comes up is, what if a person has a terminal illness and there's a treatment out there that's available, but it's very risky. And let's say there's a 40% chance. There's a 40% chance that this treatment will work, and there's a 60% chance that the treatment, or let's say the operation, will be unsuccessful and the person will die on the operating table. So is a person allowed to go through that procedure? So say a person is told that they have, God forbid, these questions are real questions which came up. They have 2 weeks to live, considering their current situation. They can have the surgery right now. There's a 40% chance it'll work and then extend their life and give them, a proper lifespan. But there's a 60% chance that they will die on the operating table. Are they allowed to go through that procedure from a Jewish standpoint? Now, we're not revisiting the whole medical ethics discussion. From an American legal standpoint, the answer is autonomy. Whatever you want to do is that's the founding principle of medical ethics, autonomy. But what is the halacha from a Jewish standpoint? And it's a very challenging question. The halachic terminology is chaye sha'a, which means temporary life, and chaye olam, which means eternal life or a regular life. And do we sacrifice chaye sha'a? Is one allowed to sacrifice or potentially give up 2 weeks of life for the possibility of longevity? And the answer is the answer. But I want to point out the first point is that often people will say in that scenario, go ahead and have the surgery because you have nothing to lose. Nothing to lose. This person only has 2 weeks left to live, and here's an opportunity to extend that life. So it is the appropriate thing is to have the surgery because you have nothing to lose. And the point that Judaism makes is that is an incorrect statement. Regardless to what the halacha is, whether you could or can't have that surgery, it's not because you have nothing to lose. You have everything to lose. 2 weeks of life. Every single day of life is a tremendous opportunity, is the achshav, the yes, and despite the fact, again, there's belief in the world to come. But the fact that you have 2 weeks to live, every day can be utilized, regardless of the level of a person's ability during that point. Every day can be a day of opportunity, whether it's mitzvahs that they can do, mitzvahs that others will do for them, with them. So the attitude of there's nothing to lose is not a Jewish attitude, even if someone only has a little bit of time left. Rather, the attitude is there's so much to gain with the possibility of extending this life. But the approach that there's nothing to lose when there's even a few days or even a few hours left is incorrect, because every moment of life here on earth, or every day certainly, is an opportunity to fulfill a mitzvah. And that opportunity won't exist as the soul moves on to the next one. Again, I'm not saying therefore the procedure can't be done. Many would say in certain situations it can be done, but it's not because there's nothing to lose. Because as we say, in this world, there's an opportunity to do mitzvahs. In the next world, that opportunity doesn't exist. And then that's the first explanation the Bartenura gives. And the second explanation, I think, is the more classic explanation. Pirosh acher. A second understanding of this is imlo achshav bimei habachrus, if not now in my days of youth, a masai, then when shema bimei hazikna lo yala liyadi. Maybe in my days as I get older, that opportunity won't come to me. So sometimes in our youth, we say that I'll delay this mitzvah, I'll delay this pursuit a holy pursuit to later in life. Right now, I'm very busy. I'm very busy with my job. I'm very busy with my career. I'm very busy pursuing my career. I'm very busy taking care of my kids. So I can't dedicate myself to Torah study. I can't dedicate myself to
Honey,
sorts of things which could
no.
happen. But
I'm starting my day.
that's what he says, that in Lo'ach Shevei Masai means that if not now, don't delay a mitzvah opportunity in your youth to when you are older. And I think, again, most specifically, we have this when it comes to Torah study, that I think there's a attitude out there that among many, I guess, young professionals, that during their early career, they just have to build their career. And right now, there's no time for Torah study. And but later, when I earn my livelihood and when I'm all set financially, then I could dedicate myself to Torah study. He says, don't assume that that's going to be the case. Don't assume you'll have the time later. There will always be things to preoccupy with. And there's all sorts of reasons why that logic doesn't hold up. But in Lo'ach Shevei Masai means don't delay mitzvahs from your youth to one's old age.
Where does it say you can wait to study until the day before you die?
All right, so it doesn't say that. It doesn't say you can wait to study until the day before you die. It says, don't say, Al Tomar Likasheshneef. It's the same idea over here. It says, don't say, when I have time, I will study. Shema lo tipana, you may never have time. This idea is conveyed several times in Pirkei Avot. But here it says it talks about specifically about study. This it says in general about mitzvahs. All right, so we share perhaps the classic commentary of the Bartenura. With our remaining time, let's share a couple other ideas on this Mishnah and some of the other ideas that are shared about this. Okay, so here's some of the classics, and then some of the deeper ideas over here. So the Rambam in his commentary on the Mishnah says that over here, this is touching upon a deeply philosophical area of Judaism. And that is the idea that Judaism believes completely in the concept of freedom of choice. As we know, one of the more challenging questions that exists in faith is the question of how can it be that I have both freedom of choice and yet Hashem knows exactly what's going to happen. So if God knows exactly what is going to happen, then really I don't have choice. It's already been determined. My actions have already been determined. It's known. There's no question. I can't change the script. The script is written. That's the question which is brought down again. And Pirkei Avot itself, to some degree, addresses this in a later Mishnah, which says Hakol Tzafui v'Rashus Nesuna. But the Rambam understands that this Mishnah over here is related to that idea. And what he says is, Emein anili, says the Rambam, Emein anili, if I am not for myself, La'orer atzmi, to inspire myself, V'livchor b'tov, and to choose good, Mi li la'orereni u'lahachricheni lazeh. Nobody else is going to compel me to do the right thing. Ki ha'bechira misura biyad ha'adam. Because the choice is given to every single human being. Ve'ein shum koach ba'olam. And there is no force in the world that will compel me to do that which is right or wrong. There is no force in the world that can push me or can cause me to do right or wrong. And that is the message, as Meina Nili Mili. If not for me, who is going to be for me? In other words, I cannot place blame on anyone else other than myself for the choices I make. There's a long write-up by Rabbi Jonathan Sachs about this topic, and he says that throughout the more recent history of different philosophies which look to explain why we behave the way we do and what forces us to behave the way we do. So we have Freud, who talks about the different early childhood relationships which compel us to do a certain way. He explains, again, this is beyond my expertise, about Marx, the Marxist system who explained that this is because of the world around us which compels us to behave a certain way. He gave different philosophies, each of which say the reason you are going to act the way you act is entirely because of maybe the way you grew up, maybe they're your surroundings, maybe the government policies around you, and that's what causes you to be who you are. And Judaism comes and rejects all of that, even though most of those philosophers were Jewish. Judaism comes and says that those influences may be influential in life. We're not denying that there are influences in your life that push you in a certain direction, but pushing you in a certain direction doesn't mean compelling you to act a certain way. And this is the Gemara says. The Gemara says that before a child is born, there's an angel. It says the angel Hamemuna B'Hirayon, the angel that is designated for pregnancy. The angel which takes the child before it's even a fetus, and says, this drop, this entity, what is it going to be? And it says, is it going to be a male or a female? Is it going to be rich or poor? And who's it going to marry? But the one thing it does not say is tzaddik v'rasha. It doesn't say. It turns to God and says, what is it going to be? Wealthy, poor, wise, tall, short. All the questions of what's going to be are asked and answered. But the one question which is not asked is this going to be a tzaddik or a rasha? Because hakol bidei shamayim chutz mirushamayim. Everything is in the hands of heaven, with the exception of fear of heaven. Fear of heaven is really by the umbrella of all of Judaism, of all of Torah. And so therefore the Rambam says, mili. If I am not for myself, then who's going to be for me? I have to take ownership of myself. I have to take responsibility for myself. I want to get into talk about topics which cross into today's social politics. But the whole idea of being a victim and the idea that I am who I am because of what happened to me. Again, it's not denying that there's some truth to that. There's some truth. Some people are victims of more difficult circumstances than others. Yes, for sure. But nonetheless, the Torah says we have to take ownership of our actions and our behavior. That this is anili, that's something which we have to take responsibility for. And we can, if we'd like, blame it on others. But that's not the Torah mindset. I have to take ownership and only myself for the actions that I do. So that is the first statement, says the Rambam. The second statement is ukeshani la'atzmi ma'ani. On the other hand, see, this is almost the opposite of the previous statement. If I am for myself, what am I? Says the Rambam. That's a sense of humility. So now, again, this is a very interesting balance that we have to have. Alongside what we said previously, he's saying, well, okay, so if I'm going to say that I take full responsibility for myself, then can't I take full credit for everything I've done? Doesn't that go hand in hand? Does it go hand in hand that if I'm held responsible for everything I've done, that I get full credit for what I've done? He says, not so fast. When you've done good things or when good things happen, ask yourself how much of this is because of blessings that Hashem gave me and gave me opportunities that others don't have. So the fact that I study Torah, well, think about the opportunities you had to have that yeshiva education. And so many things which took place which were beyond your effort, which were given to you, the gifts that were given to you. You did the mitzvah of tzedakah, that's wonderful. And it is wonderful, don't get me wrong. But think about the blessings that God gave you, that you had parnasa, perhaps abundant parnasa, an extra parnasa that you could give tzedakah. So, on the one hand, he says you have to take responsibility for yourself. On the other hand, when you do good, and you should do good, nonetheless, always be aware of, shnila atzmi, if you were to think of your life, and think of the opportunities you were given, which you handled correctly and turned into mitzvahs. But think about how many other things or other people or circumstances fell into the right place, allowing you to make the right choices, allowing you to study, allowing you to have a community, allowing you to give tzedakah. So you have that balance of responsibility and humility, then a person is carrying themselves in a very appropriate way in life. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is certainly, Musar highlights these ideas. Yeah, for sure. For sure. So that is the first two statements. And if I may add a third idea over here. So I once remember hearing somewhat perhaps today's psychological terminology to explain this. And that is that in today's, there are three words which describe our relationship with other people. The first is dependence. Being in a state of dependence is not good. Being dependent on someone else for whatever it may be, state of dependence that my well-being, my happiness, that I am fully dependent on others, it's not a healthy way to live, because a person is meant to be, to some degree, self-sufficient. On the other hand, if a person claims to be entirely independent, that's also not good. In other words, if a person says, I have my own standing, I don't need anyone else in life, I can live on my own, and I am completely independent of others, even though that initially sounds like a healthy mindset, it's not, certainly not from a Jewish standpoint. A Jewish standpoint, the thought that I can do it all on my own is not healthy, and it's not true. We have a statement we said on Shavuos, which is Torah tziva lanu Moshe, morasha kihilas Yaakov. Right? Torah tziva lanu Moshe, morasha kihilas Yaakov. So Torah tziva lanu Moshe means the Torah was given to us by Moshe. Now, the sages tell us, some of you may have studied Talmud with me the last few weeks, may be familiar with this because it came up in the Talmud, that Torah tziva lanu Moshe is a allusion to the 613 commandments. How so? Because Torah, the word Torah, is the gematria, the numerical value of Torah is 611. Taf is 400, Vav is 6, Resh is 200, Hey is 5. So 611. So you say Torah tziva lanu Moshe. The Torah 611 was commanded to us by Moshe. What do you mean 611? Are there 613 commandments? The answer is yes, but the first two were not given to us by Moshe, they were given to us by God. We all heard from God the first two, Anochi Hashem Elokecha and Lo Yeh Lecha Elokecha. The first two of the 10 commandments we heard directly from God. We didn't need to hear it from Moshe. So the first two were given to us by God, and Torah 611 were given to us by Moshe. That's 613. So that's Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe. What's the idea behind the second half of the verse? Morasha Kihilas Yaakov, which means it is Morasha is a inheritance. It's actually a heritage. It's not exactly an inheritance, a heritage to the congregation of Yaakov. How does that add to the first part? The answer is this: because the truth is, the Torah was given to us by Moshe. So we say 613 commandments were given to us. Can I fulfill 613 commandments? I cannot. I cannot, because firstly, there are some mitzvahs which are only given to men, some which is only given to women. So right away, I cannot commit all 613. There are some mitzvahs which are given to a Kohen, to a Levi, to a Yisrael, to a Melech, to a king. So there's no way to fulfill all 613 commandments. So I say, Torah, Tziva Lanu Moshe, the Torah was given to me, you gave me an impossible task. You gave me a task to fulfill 613 commandments, and I can't. So maybe I should just say, I don't know, whatever the number is. I was given 400 mitzvahs. You were given 360 mitzvahs. You were given, every person, depending where they are. So that's where the second half of the verse says, Mo Rasha, it is a inheritance, L'kehilas Yaakov, to the congregation of Jacob. As a congregation, we can fulfill all 613. If we stand as a kehila, then yes, a kehila includes all different types of people, all different types. Together, we make up the fulfillment of the 613 commandments. And that's why Morasha Kehilas Yaakov is a direct continuation of Torah Tziva Lanu, because only when we accept it as a kehila, as a congregation of Yaakov, then we can fulfill the first two commandments. We can fulfill all 613. So this is the idea behind the mistake of independence. I think I'm independent. I can independently fulfill all the mitzvahs that God wants me to do. That's also incorrect. So what is the correct attitude? So again, this is all words, but the correct attitude in today's, today's modern term is interdependence. And independence and interdependence is not dependence, it's not independence. It's a sense that we are all dependent on each other. I'm not dependent on you. I don't live a state of dependence where I'm dependent on you. You are self-standing, and I rely on you. I nurture my life from you. That's dependence. A nursing baby is dependent on the mother. And not independent in the sense that we are all independent entities, each one on our own little roads of life, unrelated to one another. We're rather interdependent. We each need one another. We're each self-standing, and we each provide to one another that which on our own we cannot do. And that is the healthy attitude of a Jew. That I have, Nili Mili says, if I'm not for myself, if I look at myself as being dependent, then Mili, I'm dependent on others. Nobody's going to bring me the merits that I need in life. So I say, okay, so the answer is independence. Anila Atzmi, I am for myself, and that's how I live life. No, Ma'ani, I can't. Ma'ani, what am I if I'm on my own? I can't really properly fulfill the will of Hashem if I stand entirely on my own. The answer is, their recognition that we stand together. I take ownership and responsibility for my life, for my behavior, for my mitzvahs, for the mistakes I've done, but I also recognize the need that I have to stand alongside Klal Yisrael, because I have to give and I have to take as part of my service of Hashem. And that's the not only psychologically healthy, perhaps mentally healthy approach, but it's a spiritually healthy approach as well. And finally, the last statement, V'im lo achshav eimasa, and if not now, when? So the explanations they gave from the Bartanura is that it's either this world and the next world, or perhaps this even within this world, my youth and my old age. The Medrash Shmuel says, why not use a term which is otherwise used, which is imlo hayom imasa, if not today. Yeah, this also when it says hayom, today you should do the mitzvahs. Why didn't it say today, instead it says now? So Medrash Shmuel says sometimes even within this very day, this attitude is necessary. And that is even within a day itself. Don't push off an opportunity because you may not know an opportunity that presents in the beginning of the day may not be present at the end of the day. There's that separate idea which says that anytime you do a mitzvah, do it at the earliest opportunity. That's a separate idea. That even if you know the opportunity is going to be later in the day, but don't delay a mitzvah. Mitzvah, the word in the Talmud is mitzvah haba liyadcha al tachmitzan. If a mitzvah comes to your hand, don't allow it to become chametz. Chametz is the dough which has risen. Don't let the mitzvah become chametz. Matzos, and mitzvos are the same letters. So that's the idea. Matzah, your mitzvos should be like matzos, in which you don't let it delay. So the idea is don't let it delay. But it's something else. Here, saying that imlo achshav eimasa is saying sometimes an opportunity that you have now may not be present later in the day or a few days later. Don't let it wait. So I'll conclude with a story with which I just remember hearing from my father a long time ago, but I reviewed it with him just beforehand. A story about a man who came to have a yechidus at an audience with the Rabbi. This man was the grandson of a great sage in Yerushalayim. His name was Tzvi Pesach Frank, and so the Rabbi spoke to him for a while. If I'm not mistaken, this guy was a newspaper. I may be wrong, but I think he was someone in the media, maybe a writer. And the Rebbe asked him for stories about his grandfather. He shared the stories. He asked another story. Then he says maybe another story. He says, here's a story. He says, in before 1929, there was a family named Berman in New York, and they had a son that went to Israel to study. I remember hearing maybe it was only son, but either way, they had a son studied in Israel. And at some point, tension was heating up in 1929, which, by the way, is important for the context of what we're dealing with today. They talk about the tension. The 1948 or 1967, the Arabs wanted to kill the Jews in 1929 as well. Anyway, the story was that the parents who were in New York, were very worried about their son, and therefore they reached out to this Rosh Yeshiva in Yerushalayim saying, can you send our son home? And his response was, let him stay here and study, and it'll be my achrayus. It'll be my responsibility that he'll be okay. He was studying in Hebron. In the summer of 1929, there was a terrible massacre in Hebron. And the Arabs, it was really a pogrom, like what we saw on October 7th. And they, I believe maybe 67 people were killed. They went house to house. They went to the yeshivas. One of the victims, one of those people who was killed, was that yeshiva student. He was killed. And you can imagine that obviously the parents were devastated. And another person who was devastated was that Rosh Yeshiva, Rabbi Frank, because he knew that he had taken this burden on his shoulders. And so the grandson is relating this to the Rebbe. He says, fast forward a little bit. He says, fast forward, I think he says to 1948. And I was sitting in a shelter. I was in a shelter and I was speaking with someone. And I struck up a conversation with turns out to be a cousin of that yeshiva boy, Berman. And we were talking, and I said to him, you should know, my grandfather has never been the same since that episode. He's really been sabrach, and he's been broken about this, and he's never been the same. So the grandson says, I want to tell you something. He says, yes, my cousin was killed, but my parents in America were very Apparently, they're prominent people, activists, and they use their son's death as a motivation to work really hard with the local government and move on to high-level government officials to push to allow more Jews to immigrate from Europe to Israel. Apparently, this is at the time when there was severe restrictions by the British, and they used their connections and they pushed. And he says because of their efforts, thousands of more Jews were allowed to immigrate to Palestine in the 1930s. And those Jews, two things: one, they were saved from the Holocaust; two, they became fighters in the War of Independence. He says you should know this was all the direct result of my cousin being killed. So this man came home, he heard about this, and he says, I have to go tell my grandfather this. I have to go tell my grandfather. So he comes home, went home to his parents, and he said, I need to go tell Zayda. It was early in the week. He says, I need to go tell Zayda this. He's going to lift his spirits. And they said, okay, but you usually go at the end of the week. You usually go Friday. It's only, Monday. Wait till Friday. He says, no, I can't wait even a day. He says, I'm going right now. I'm traveling. Obviously, traveling was very difficult then. And he did. He traveled to his, he schlepped out to his grandfather, and he met his grandfather. His grandfather was at that point not well. He went to him, and he went over to him, and he says, you should know. And he told him what this young man had told him. And his grandfather, his whole countenance lit up. He was so thankful, so happy to hear this. It really lifted that burden off of his shoulders. And he went back home. This young man went back home to his parents. Came back Shabbos. He was going to go back to his grandfather. He went Friday. When he arrived Friday, they told him, you should know that your grandfather passed away just the night before. And he shared this story with the Rabbi. And the Rebbe said the story is beautiful, and one of the most important messages of the story is, the Rebbe says something I always tell Machsidim, which is not to delay a mitzvah. Had he just delayed a couple days to tell his grandfather, he wouldn't have had the opportunity to give that relief, to remove the pain of 20 years that he had carried. And because he rushed, and he said, I'll do it today, not waiting 3 days, he was able to fulfill that tremendous mitzvah for his Zayda. And this is, I apologize if a detail or two is off in the story, but that's the story. That's the idea behind the story. And this is the Imla Achshav Masai. Sometimes we have three explanations. One is talking about this world versus the next world. The other explanation is it's about in your youth versus your old age, but it could be even within a few days. There's a mitzvah opportunity, especially when it comes to doing a kindness to someone else or convincing someone to do a mitzvah. Don't delay it, because one never knows if that opportunity will still be available later on. All right, thank you everyone for joining for our study today.